the latest dose of bipolar recorder. This podcast may cause dizziness and blurred vision. Enjoy.
Hello there, this is Bipolar Recorder. I am your questionable host, Hunter Keegan. We started this show back in October 2021 and now have well over 50 fantastic installments that people can check out. Be sure that you've listened to all of these tales of mental illness and survival. As I mentioned in our last release, the Bipolar Recorder mini documentary is now available on Twitter/X and YouTube. The Twitter video has over 10,000 views, and the YouTube one has like 100. So, like I've said before, our primary social media presence is on the platform now known as X, and that's where we get the most traction. The documentary, formally titled Bipolar Recorder Exploring New Frontiers for Mental Health Support, is about 20 minutes long and details the origins of my independent mental health advocacy mission and what Bipolar Recorder has now evolved into. One of the key aspects of the documentary is discussing our Spaces community on the X platform. If you've never checked out Spaces, I talk about it a lot on this show because it's become such a big part of Bipolar Recorder. So I highly recommend following at Bipolar Recorder on Twitter/X and joining our regularly hosted live peer support conversations. There's no set schedule for when I host the spaces, but I do them multiple times a week. So the best way to get notified about them is to follow at Bipolar Recorder and send me a message to be added to our group notification list. I'm really proud of the mini documentary. It's my first major foray into the world of video media content, and I produced it myself, so I learned a whole lot throughout the course of working on it. It was filmed on a budget of less than $5,000, so hopefully this will become like the Blair Witch Project or Paranormal Activity, and reap massive profits that we can use to continue fueling Bipolar Recorder. Check out the documentary. It's on Twitter/X and YouTube, or you can simply Google Bipolar Recorder mini documentary, and it should show up in your search results. Anyhow, for today's installment, I wanted to share the psychology student Q&A discussions from my April 19th outreach presentations at Penn State University. If you haven't listened to the full presentation yet, it was on our last release, number 56. I recommend listening to that audio first so you have context for the students' questions. I was so thrilled that the students had deep and thoughtful questions about the information that I discussed during my presentation. Because the audio was recorded in a large lecture hall, some of it is a little difficult to hear, so I inserted a couple of voiceovers at various points to explain what I was being asked. Let's go. Okay, does anyone want to open with like a question or comment? Yes.
So you mentioned about how your family pressured you to see a psychiatrist and how you didn't like that. You think people should make their own decisions regarding that. What do you think your family should have done if they saw you struggling? How could they have helped better?
It's such a good question, and I think that what was really missing from my communication with my family in those days was just empathy and compassion. Like many people, my parents considered the symptoms of mental illness that I was displaying, they considered them to be character flaws or that I was a bad person or something. So when they were telling me, go see a psychiatrist, it wasn't like, hey buddy, we think this will help you. It was more like, go see a psychiatrist or you can't live with us. I was like, all right. So that was kind of the overall tone of those conversations, and that's how I was introduced to the world of psychiatry as an adult. And I think that if my family had listened more, if we had been able to sit down and have more structured, productive dialogues, that would have been really helpful for just feeling more supported and recognizing that it's okay to like get involved with a psychiatrist. It's okay to take medication if you feel that you need it. It doesn't mean that you're like a bad person or that you're not going to be able to live a productive life. Does that answer your question? Okay. One thing that I think would have been really helpful would be like family therapy sort of sessions. That would have been really cool if we had done that in 2015. Thanks for your question. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
How do you think your background in psychology shaped the way that you view your own mental illness?
Wow. So for a long time, the background in psychology kind of misled me into thinking I was very dialed into my own mental health, when in fact I wasn't at all. So when doctors were like, you're bipolar, I was like, I think I know a thing or two about that. And it's like, yeah, maybe in like a textbook sort of sense you do, but in terms of the lived experience and what it can look like in real life, that's a much different story. I can tell you that now my background in psychology has actually served me extremely well for the purposes of the mental health advocacy work that I've been doing. A lot of people in the mental health advocacy space don't actually have formal education in psychology or any type of social science, and that's actually very limiting. I'm not trying to like talk down on what they're doing. It's very important stuff, but like the angle I come at it from is much different. If you read this book, you'll see that it's very much written at like the college level. I wrote it specifically for like freshman Psych 100 students. It's like at that kind of level where you'll learn something, it's educational, but it's also very human and like candid. So I think people will like that.
The next student asks me a question about music therapy and how it's impacted me.
Music therapy and its effects. That's such a cool question, man. I think that music in general is extremely intrinsically valuable to most people. I think most people enjoy listening to music, right? So that in of itself is something that lends well to therapy. In my personal experience, the therapeutic nature of it comes from the concentration that you have to have when you're creating the music. It keeps you very focused, and it keeps you in a certain zone that can be very helpful if you're having like intrusive thoughts or things of that nature. Also, if you're playing through like a proper electric guitar rig that's really cranked up and is like vibrating the room, that's going to shake your diaphragm. And there's research that shows there's actually, like, you all would probably know more about this than I would, but there's some sort of like nerve center in your chest that when it vibrates, it allegedly can like calm you down. And I think that has something to do with it too. So that's been my own experience. And in terms of music therapy, what I always say is you don't have to be like a professional musician and I'm not really I wouldn't consider myself a professional musician. It's something I do on a moonlight basis. But you don't have to be like a pro. You don't have to be technically gifted to do it. You can literally take up 2 sticks and just hit stuff with them, and that counts too. So thank you for your question.
For what advice could you give for somebody who's newly diagnosed with bipolar disorder?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, including throughout the peer support conversations that I host on the X platform. In terms of people who are newly diagnosed, I think one of the most important things you can do is educate yourself. A lot of psychiatrists and even psychologists aren't going to sit down and like really explain to you what's happening. My psychiatrist, who I first saw in 2015, she was just like, you're manic, you're acting so manic. She wasn't really telling me like what that meant or like what the implications were or how that plays out or can play out. So I think by doing your own research and informing yourself about the technical aspects of your condition, that can be very helpful for starting to navigate the process. Also, if you're newly diagnosed, I would say find community, find other people who have lived with similar experiences, and see what kind of support and resources you can get from them. All right, thanks for your question. Yes, in the green.
What was it about each of your therapists that signifies to you that some were a better fit than others and some might have not been as good a fit?
Yeah, there's all sorts of different red flags to watch out for. I talk about this in my book, actually. One of the red flags for me, well, oh man, where to start? I made probably 4 different attempts at finding a therapist until I found the one who I've currently been working with, and like I love her. Like we've been working together for over 5 years now. She's great. Prior to that, I was running into therapists who were very judgmental, which is like strange, right? It's like, you're a therapist. Why are you sitting here judging me? And that was a huge turnoff. I was also getting met with prejudice from certain therapists. I met with one therapist who didn't want to work with me because I had been hospitalized before, which I thought was incredibly not okay. So keep in mind, you're going to face stigma even from within the professional community in some cases. Things like that, things like not being actively engaged during our conversations. Like if I can tell that a therapist is distracted, that is, you gotta be kidding me. Like, they need to be treating it as a professional conversation that they're providing services to you during. In terms of what makes my current therapist really good and a good fit for me on a personal level, I think, you know, she has a doctorate and she has a lot of certifications and stuff, but really, like, even if she didn't have that, it's just her demeanor, it's her composure, it's the way she frames questions and the way she articulates things in like a very neutral manner. I had a really intense crisis a couple of years ago, and I called her like panicking, and I explained what had happened, and I wasn't even sure what to call it, and she was just like, okay, so that you had an event. I was like, oh yeah, it was an event. It was just like the perfect like neutral word to use for it, and it helps ground me and like put things into perspective. So things like that are very useful. It also helps that she's into like punk rock and stuff, so like in terms of cultural touch points, like we have that going too. So yeah, but there are a lot of not so great therapists out there, unfortunately. Are any of you thinking about going into therapy, like or clinical? That's the route you're thinking of taking? Yeah. Cool, man. Well, good luck with that, and remember that really at the end of the day, it's the demeanor, it's the vibe you're laying down. You want to make sure you're creating a comfortable and safe environment. Yeah.
Do you think you should have been forced to be hospitalized when you were?
Fuck no. Are you serious? No, I'm just kidding. No. So here's the thing. Law enforcement, in my opinion, should not be involved in anything related to healthcare unless it is a situation where someone is a danger to others. The way I was detained by police is I was in my parents' basement. I was playing Grand Theft Auto and drinking heavily, and I got into a fight with my parents, like a verbal altercation. They called the cops. A couple of police officers came into the basement, and pretty soon I was surrounded by like 6 cops and like a dozen paramedics, and everyone's up in my space. Like, so if I'm sitting like here, I have like several police officers surrounding me, and I'm like, and I stood up like this reflexively, and they're like, don't do that. And I was like, fuck you. And they were like, yeah, and so that didn't go well. And I was like handcuffed, and it's just ridiculous. My question, I think in response to that is like, what type of resources do you think are offered at the hospital that would have been beneficial? And the reality, and there are probably people in here who have been to psych hospitals before, like I'm not the only one who experiences these things. The experience is typically pretty negative, especially if you're brought in against your will. And it's a very scary environment in some cases. There are good stories here and there of people who have had positive experiences, but unfortunately mine wasn't one of them. And if you listen to the podcast and listen to other accounts of these types of situations, I think you'll hear similar sentiments. You will hear some similar sentiments. So again, you know, there are circumstances where there may be that level of intervention required. Again, for me, that litmus test would be like, is this person actually a danger to others? Like for me, that's the key thing. Like, are they going to go out and hurt someone else, or are they just acting strangely or not adhering to the norm? Yeah, thank you. Yes, let's get here and then we'll go back there.
My question is kind of similar. What do you think is the best way to kind of nudge someone who is having a crisis or who does need help to make that choice for themselves so that you can avoid any like sort of traumatic episode like that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it's going to vary a lot on like the individual factors, but I think one key thing is like make sure the person understands that it's their decision that they're making to do it. Like there's a lot of research showing that if someone feels coerced to do something, it's like not going to work out well. So I think that coming at it from that angle, working with them, asking them what they want to do, like what do you think you need at this time, and like how can we support that? How can we make sure that you're living a safe and happy life? That's a lot different of an approach to come at it from, instead of like, you're having symptoms, like you need to talk to somebody, right? So I think that's one thing that comes to mind for me. Yeah, in the blue.
The next student asks me what career paths I was considering during my time at Penn State, and if there were any subfields of psychology that I was particularly intrigued by as a student.
Yeah, great question. I was really involved with industrial organizational psychology programs out here, which is interesting. Like, I was focusing more on like IO and social psych while I was at Penn State. I did take some abnormal psych courses though toward the end, and that's how I started getting more interested in that side of things, was Dr. Weimer's class. But in terms of what my career path that I was anticipating at the time was, I did really well academically, and I was actually in a situation where I was strongly considering a PhD. I thought that I wanted to go into academia for a while. I was very closely involved with some research labs, and yeah, so that was the path that I kind of saw. But honestly, I decided kind of toward the end of my college experience that I didn't think that the academic world was really for me. And then I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And thus I ended up staying at my parents' place in Northern Virginia, going on road trips and getting into trouble. But that's basically how that came to be. Does that answer your question? Okay. Sweet.
How's your relationship with your parents?
My relationship with my parents has gotten way better over the years. During 2015, you know, we were not on good terms at all. Like, they didn't even want me living with them. Like, the fact that they let me stay at their house after the hospitalization was huge, because otherwise I would have been homeless. And when I came back from the hospital, this will give you an idea of like what the vibe was. They were like, we don't want you here. Stay in the basement. Don't fucking bother us. So that's the kind of like level of support that I had from like my dad and my mom. However, I'll say, over the years, we've been able to rekindle these relationships. My dad, actually, this meant a lot to me. A couple years ago, he read a book that I recommended to him. It's called The Essential Family Guide for Understanding Bipolar Disorder. It's written by a psychologist who I know. Her name is Amy Doremus. And it was a really good breakdown about like, hey, from the family perspective, this is kind of what you need to understand. And so my dad finally read that book, and he's really worked to like inform himself about the nature of bipolar and kind of like what it's like on the day-to-day. And so he and I are extremely close now. We get along great. Like, we talk like multiple times a week usually. And it's awesome. Now, my mom, on the other hand, she and I are very similar personality types, which I recognize. And what that means is if we are in the same room for more than like a couple of minutes, it tends to get kind of heated. But it's not like it's not like we're not cool with each other. It's just kind of like family, kind of like butting of heads at this point. So that's where we're at now, and it has been a big healing journey. Thank you for your question. All right, all the way in the back.
Do you think, from your experience or just in general, that psychiatric hospitals, like being admitted, worsens symptoms of mental health?
Yeah, dude. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, if you haven't been through that, like basically, so if you get brought in by police, they like take you in through a scary back entrance in a garage, at least in this particular hospital I was at. And then, you know, you're handcuffed the entire time. They do blood tests and EKG tests without your consent. It's all very bizarre. It's very, especially if you're under the impression that you've been stalked by the government for the last like 4 months, and then this shit starts actually happening. It's really intense. So I think that, I mean, it's going to be difficult, and I think in terms of psych hospitalization, like, we need to keep in mind that these need to be reserved for, like, the most extreme cases, and unfortunately, what we see happening, and this is what really concerns me, I'll put it to you this way. I understand that there are situations where someone is so gravely disabled that, like, they do not know where they are, they're disoriented, they're panicking, you know, that's really dangerous, and, like, yes, like, please get that person help. What concerns me are the intermediate situations where, for example, you're trying to talk to a therapist about suicidal ideation and they overreact, and next thing you know, you're in a psychiatric unit surrounded by, you know, people that could be in distress, abusive staff, etc. So that's kind of the angle that I come at it from. I don't want to say that psych hospitalization doesn't serve an important purpose and can't be life-saving for some people. It's just, in a lot of scenarios, I don't think it's the right approach.
How can we recognize that ourselves or people around us is there some features that comes from its own born personality or kind of come to disorder?
Can you say the first part of your question one more time, please?
Yeah, just how can we recognize that the feature comes from our personality or the mental illness?
Yeah. Wow, I mean, I wish I could answer that, but that's a question that's, like, as old as time. Like, Greek philosophers were debating those sorts of concepts, right? So, I mean, it's a fascinating question. Is it an aspect of someone's personality, or is it an aspect of, you know, something else, an external force or a mental illness, a genetic quirk of some kind? Sorry?
Usually a combination.
Yeah, a combination of all of them, yeah. So, yeah, it's a very interesting question. I wish I had a succinct, articulate answer for you. I don't know that I do. I think one way you can narrow these things down, though, for yourself is consider what you've learned so far. You know, keep in mind, this is a mood disorder, not a personality disorder. That's one way you can start narrowing it down and parsing out, you know, where do I fall on this ideologically? So maybe that's something to consider. Yeah.
Knowing what you know now, would you have done anything differently in your 20s?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think the answer to that would have been I would have avoided alcohol. I know that's, like, not, like, the most rock and roll answer, but seriously, like, alcohol is very destructive on a physical and mental level, and with the amount of self-medication that I was doing in those days, it was like throwing gasoline onto an inferno. And it was directly, I think that if I had not been drinking in 2015, during the manic episode, I probably would have been able to avoid hospitalization. I think that, you know, especially considering the symptoms of psychosis and all of that, it was just, alcohol is something that I have learned over the years is best to avoid. We have a few hands. Let's go here and here.
Okay. So, as someone who, like, involves themselves with the arts in different ways, with, like, music and stuff, how do you feel that, like, the media, especially movies and TV shows, have kind of, like, maybe positive, like, views of different types of mental health conditions versus, like, the ones that do a terrible job?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, like, ones that I would consider not doing a terrible job. I'm trying to think. Okay, one that comes to mind, and this isn't a perfect example, obviously. This is flawed. I don't want people to be like, no, you're wrong. Silver Linings Playbook, in my opinion, has a couple of really good scenes where Bradley Cooper's character is describing delusions during mania. That as I was watching that movie, I was like, oh, this is actually hitting pretty close to home. That is a good, it's an acceptable depiction of bipolar mania. If you're looking for a specific scene to check out, there's one where he's talking about having a delusion that his wife was cheating on him, and he, like, goes to someone's house to confront them about it. That was, like, pretty hardcore. There is a movie called Unsane, which is a horror movie about a woman who gets involuntarily committed to a psychiatric hospital. It came out a few years ago. It's super disturbing. It was probably the most triggering movie I've ever watched. So if you want to get that kind of vibe of, like, what it feels like to be in a psych ward, I can't say I would recommend it, but That's what comes to mind. I'm trying to think of other ones, but to be honest with you, these conditions are just so misunderstood that in order for really there to be an accurate depiction, I think it's the sort of thing that maybe the filmmakers would have to consult with like actual people who live with those conditions. So thank you for your question, though. That's an awesome question. And we wanted to go here as well.
Just as a quick aside, I think one of the producers for Silver Linings Playbook has a son with bipolar.
That makes a lot of sense.
But my question, you talked about how medication has helped, but it doesn't get rid of the fluctuations entirely. But how does it differ with the fluctuations between on medication versus off medication?
Oh, yeah. Wow, that's such a good question. And so keep in mind here, I'm speaking from individual experience because this is obviously going to be way different for everyone. When I was not on medication, my symptoms of psychosis were so much more severe. There was a time where I briefly went off of antipsychotic meds. I was still taking mood stabilizers and stuff. I don't want to go into a ton of detail about my medication, but like, basically, I stopped taking an antipsychotic for a few months, and during that time, I had like rebound psychosis. It was really scary and lasted for like 2 months. I had a delusion that I had been infected by a parasite and that it was like feeding off of my body for like 2 months. It was super fucked up and scary. And I lost a ton of weight during that time. This was like a depression, like psychotic depression. And that is why I continue to take psych meds now. I still take antipsychotics. I found them to be helpful. I find that when I'm on medication, the symptoms can still escalate, but they don't quite get to a level where I'm like imagining shadow people like coming down my chimney and stuff, you know what I mean? So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you. So can you talk a little bit more about how your degree in psychology and your background have impacted your journey and also your podcast and what you talk about on there?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that. I think it's really important to have some sort of formal background in social science if you're going to do this type of outreach work. I'm not saying you necessarily need a degree, but I think there's a lot of mental health advocates operating in this space who don't really have like the formal knowledge base to draw from. A lot of people say, oh, a bachelor's degree in social science, liberal arts, what? Yeah, there's a lot you can do with this knowledge base. It might not necessarily be the same as like an engineering degree where you're going to get like one specific type of job, but it's been a kind of like multidisciplinary background to draw from, and what it's been extremely helpful for is being able to actually read and interpret scientific research and be able to like actually understand like what the statistics mean and like what does the abstract say, what is the conclusion. You don't have to get into like the minutia of the methodology and things like that, but just that alone is very helpful for when I'm trying to research material for like a podcast episode or for like this presentation. You know, all the information, all the statistics that I cited were pulled from like CDC, NIMH, APA, and it's useful to know how to navigate those different types of sources. That might be kind of a boring answer, but I think it is important to keep in mind. And definitely as psychology students yourselves, and is anyone graduating soon? Oh, whoa! Whoa, that's so many of you. Okay, congratulations. You will all be uniquely equipped to go out into the world and like talk to people about these issues. And you do have like unique perspective and expertise to bring. So I do hope that you will consider, you know, continuing to think about mental health advocacy and just keeping that in mind as you move forward in your lives.
You mentioned experiencing mixed psychotic symptoms, and from what I heard, it included both delusions and hallucinations. So I know how the definitions differ, but as someone who experienced both, how would you distinguish them?
Well, remember that delusions are what you're thinking, and then hallucinations are going to be like a false sensory perception, like smelling or tasting something that's not there, or of course seeing or hearing something that's not there. So they're often interrelated, but in some cases people will only experience one or the other during like a particular psychotic episode.
So the parasite example that you gave, would that be like more hallucination?
No, that would be more of a delusion. So in that case, If you want to hear more about this, I talk about it in my books a little bit, but basically, I started getting like unnecessary medical procedures done and shit, so it was getting taken to a level that was like really, really getting weird. That was like I said during the presentation itself, that was extremely disturbing and extremely scary. That happened back in like 2018, if I'm remembering correctly. But thank you for your question. That's a great question, and it's important to understand the distinction.
Like when you were on the road trip and like you were kind of by yourself experiencing those symptoms, and at that time did you realize that maybe something was different than before, like you were going through something that was not quite normal, or not necessarily until you got back?
That's such a good question. I'm trying to remember, like, I didn't really start recognizing that my behavior was abnormal until maybe like March or April of that year, because I would be experiencing symptoms of psychosis. And like I remember, so as an example, there was one night I was like sleeping in the living room in my parents' house, and my dad and I were both like crashed out on different couches in the living room, and I just kept hearing voices, and I like stood up and started like yelling into the darkness, and when I did that, I was like, oh wait, dude, this is crazy, like what are you doing? But I was still like, I couldn't break myself out of it, but like it was very, it caused like a lot of cognitive dissonance, you know? It was very strange, so I guess that's just one example of that.
Throughout like your experience, or do you have a take on like medical marijuana and if it's been helpful in your journey or not, or the opposite?
What's marijuana? Yeah, I love marijuana. Okay, so I'm not a doctor, right? But a lot of doctors frown upon bipolar people using cannabis. In my own personal experience, I use medical marijuana. It's been very helpful for mood stability. You can definitely use it in a way that's detrimental and abusive, but if you can establish a relationship with it where it's going to be balanced and not like dominating your life, then yeah.
Thank you.
But yeah, marijuana's helpful.
When you like have delusions, are they repeat delusions or are they different every time?
Yeah. Again, that's going to be something that kind of varies from person to person. So I really had two instances of very significant delusions, and the first was in 2015, which I talked about during the presentation, and then the second was in 2018, which was the psychotic depression. So in terms of like if those delusions were repeating, that remains to be seen. But I always kind of have like a healthy paranoia about the government going on, and so I wouldn't be surprised if that eventually comes back. But like I said, you know, since being on antipsychotic meds for most of the last like 8 to 9 years, I haven't really had major symptoms with psychosis normally, and I'm very thankful for that.
I know BP typically gets diagnosed in early 20s. So as a child and through adolescence, were there any indications that you might have had or something through your college experiences that kind of clued you into that something might be different from your childhood, or not really?
Yeah, it's so hard because I think when you're like 18 or 19, you're still learning so much about yourself and your life and your relationship with the world around you. So it's really difficult to narrow it down, but I think something that I did notice when I was like 18 or 19 was like, I think I'm using drugs and alcohol more excessively than people around me. That was like one of the like early signs where I was like, I'm tending to go like pretty hard here. And yeah, so I guess that is one of the things that was foreshadowing it.
I'm sure things have changed, but I feel like in my experience being a psych major, like a lot of the stuff that we learn about like destigmatizes mental illness and treating mental illness and medicating for mental illness. So like how did your experience like being a psych major but then not wanting to be medicated, like how did that work out?
Yeah, I think that like in addition to my college education that I was involved with at that time, my other education was like the Joe Rogan Experience, the podcast, and like on that show, don't get medical advice from Joe Rogan, because like back in like 2011, that's back when they were always talking about how bad antidepressants were, how they change your personality. So I had a lot of personal stigma because of Joe Rogan. All right, I'm joking. Like Joe's fine, but like seriously, stuff like that, hearing those sorts of statements really turned me off of the whole thing. I was like, is this going to change my personality and turn me into someone who I'm not? The whole personal identity thing was a big factor in all of that. So, yeah. Great question. Thank you.
How did, were you, hesitant to go see a psychiatrist? Or?
At the time, it didn't really bother me because I didn't think anything was wrong. So I saw it as an opportunity, actually, to get access to pharmaceutical narcotics. So I was like, okay, I'll go talk to her and I'll just say I have anxiety and hopefully she'll cut me some good scripts. And instead, I went in, but basically, I went in and I was just acting so manic that, instead she started cutting me prescriptions for, lithium, and I was like, this sucks. But I kept going just because I didn't really care. I wasn't taking it seriously at all. I thought I was just really high on life and, had just graduated college and was on top of the world having a great time. But, objectively, something more problematic was occurring.
So I have a friend who's been diagnosed with BP and who's also struggled with staying on medication and stuff. How do you supporting them? Do you have anything to say the best way to do that with struggling as they're struggling with that?
That's exactly the type of relationships and conversations we want to see happening so these issues can stop being whispered about, right? So that's phenomenal. In terms of what you can do to support friends who are newly diagnosed and are very much still navigating the experience, I think honestly, just letting them know that you're there to listen if they want to talk is huge. And you can still establish boundaries and be like, hey, let me know if you want to talk about something heavy and I'll reach back out to you or whatever. You can establish it in that sort of way. But I think knowing that you have the support of your friends and family and community is hugely beneficial for getting to that place of stability and not feeling like a victim or you have a disability, but rather this is just an aspect of my life that I deal with and I kind of roll with the punches on. But yeah, that's a fantastic question, and I think it really does all begin with listening and communication.
So kind of piggybacking off of that question, were there any times that you felt anybody went the wrong way about it and kind of led you in the wrong direction?
Besides Joe Rogan? I was friends with some real homies back in those days, some really good buddies of mine, and we had a great relationship as homies, but also we weren't really keeping an eye on each other, and so I think there were times where, for example, my friends probably should have been hey dude, take it down a few notches, or even, it's possible that they were like that and I just ignored them, don't remember, but, things like that, kind of checking each other as friends, not, you don't have to be a super authoritarian person or anything, but just looking out for each other would have been helpful back then.
Obviously you're open about your mental health, clearly, but do you ever feel apprehensive at all to share your story or feel judged by people? Because I myself am relatively open about it, but there's times do I want to post on my Instagram story? Because I feel people, which is stupid, you can see it, but people unfollow me and stuff like that. And again, I'm comfortable with it, but I still feel judged at times and apprehensive. Do you ever feel that?
Yeah, I feel that all the time. But you gotta remind yourself, don't concern yourself with tiny minds when they get blown. It's what I tell myself, straight up. Because if people are not able to wrap their heads around this sort of thing, that's okay. We're still here doing what we're doing. So when they want to come around and approach that, whenever they're ready to, it'll be there. And for people who actively want more support and want to learn more about these things, we're there as a resource. So I think that is really important to keep in mind too. In terms of social media followers and stuff, I hear you, man. Because even though it sounds silly, it's invalidating if you post something and you lose a bunch of people. You're oh, did I do something wrong? And it's no, but there will be judgment out there that comes with the territory. I personally don't let it bother me anymore. I'm very confident in what I'm doing. the fact that you all are here listening to this and people haven't just completely walked out already is like amazing. So thank you. All right. Okay, and there was a question back here too.
We touched like on our normal psych class about like solo commitment, and I know you touched on that too. And I can definitely see like how unethical, but like I know you have like personal experience. So I was just curious like what you think about it.
Like in terms of like the ethical ramifications?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, so first of all, I think on a very general level, law enforcement shouldn't be included with medical care. If there is a cop detaining you and taking you to a location, in my mind, that is a criminal matter where you should have like an attorney and other things. Now, in a civil commitment hearing, you do have an attorney, but it's an attorney who's given to you at the hospital. They take your cell phone and everything else from you, so you can't contact anybody. And then you're basically stuck there with some random court-appointed attorney who may or may not have any experience in mental health law. So from that, like, starting point, everything continues to go downhill. At least it did in my experience. Psychiatric hospitals are not always safe places. They can be very distressing places. I know some real horror stories about psych hospitals. A lot of them have been discussed on the Bipolar Recorder podcast. There are certain situations where people do have like life-saving, helpful treatment at psych wards, and that's amazing. But unfortunately, I cannot say that I have that experience. But thank you for your question. Thank you so much for coming out, guys.
Thank you for listening to this conversation with the wonderful young scholars at Penn State. It's an immense honor that people take the time to listen to me talk about my life experiences. Remember to check out the Bipolar Recorder mini documentary, available on the platform now known as X, and YouTube. I've sent it out to some film festivals, so I'm hoping that helps it continue gaining momentum. And remember that the YouTube video only has a fraction of the views that the X video has. I'm just mentioning that so you don't think you're the only one following this project. Speaking of followers, be sure to follow Bipolar Recorder on X/Twitter at Bipolar Recorder. We still have Instagram, Mastodon, etc. accounts that I occasionally post to, but X is by far my favorite platform, so that's where you can find the most up-to-date content. Join our mental health peer support spaces conversations, view interesting and revealing behind-the-scenes content, find educational information, etc., etc. I'm on Twitter/X at HHKeegan if you'd like to follow my personal account. Don't forget to check out bipolarrecorder.com and patreon.com to support this project financially, because this show is independent, ad-free, and ethical. So we currently primarily rely on merch sales and listener subscriptions to keep things funded. That's all for now. My name is Hunter Keegan. Stay safe and have a great day, evening, or night, wherever you are. Bipolar Recorder is a listener-supported show. To help keep the show running, consider checking out our Patreon page or visiting bipolarrecorder.com.
Unless otherwise stated, the hosts and guests on Bipolar Recorder are not licensed mental health professionals. Bipolar Recorder is not a substitute for therapy or professional medical intervention. If you are having a mental health crisis, please contact your local emergency services.